This is group number 5, and I'm C, and who's A?
I'm Kristen, A.
I'm Alicia, D, also D for Dacus.
Brian, B.
Tabby, E.
And this is discussion for post 4.
Yep. Today is Monday, February 3rd. I think we agreed we're going to start talking about the Precious Knowledge video. So that was interesting. Very dynamic teacher. He seemed like he really got the. Well, it wasn't just one teacher, I think. Yeah.
Really good.
But it was really showing how it seemed like the thrust of that program was to get students, Latino students, to learn more about the culture where they come from and be proud of that.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if there were other students from other cultures in there too.
It seemed like there were a few white kids
Yeah.
in the class, yeah.
I think it's valuable for both groups,
Mhm.
for everyone to get a really good understanding of that culture.
Yeah, and I was telling Tom about how, one of the teachers was saying, he wants them to read Twain, he wants them to read Fitzgerald, but first he's going to start off with, this Mexican type of literature that, the students can connect with, and, it makes them more motivated to read, so that, once they kind of, have covered all their bases in, that genre, maybe that'll then, kind of make it so that they're more willing to read outside of that genre and outside of their culture.
And it's also L1 reinforcement, first language reinforcement, and building up and reinforcing their first culture and then being able to draw on that and those experiences to relate to this new language and material.
Because I think such an important part of learning is for students to make personal connections, and just today in a classroom I was volunteering in, they were relating to each other through sharing things that they brought in from their personal lives and their culture and everything, and then the students would write about it and make connections, how they related to that student's story. So it's learning to make connections and feeling that connection is so important for learning.
That model, the whole model of that school is in support of all the research of the more Americanized, more one assimilates to American culture, the more they seem to deteriorate in every way.
I heard some statistic about that, their health goes down.
Well,
Well,
health,
that's true,
gang violence,
An
sexual activity, drug abuse, self-esteem, everything it's I guess that attempt to try to, be like the Jones when you're not the Jones.
Yeah.
No.
Well, you're not the Jones, and you're never going to be the Jones. So if you're feeling like you should be the Jones, then you're never going to feel really good about yourself.
No.
It seems like.
And so that's the whole build-up of that school is hey, you're not the Jones, and it's perfectly fine you're not the Jones. And it validates their culture and their history and their background and their ancestry and everything. And when you have that foundation, then you can, you go into American culture with much more confidence, I think.
Yeah, I feel like that's just kind of the whole entire idea of multicultural education. It's everybody's allowed to have their culture in order to go on and understand other cultures, You have to kind of like the old saying, know yourself before you can know others,
Right. But we are being very enthusiastic about that, but obviously that was a controversial program. There were people who didn't agree with it. So why would anybody object to that? What do you think?
I think because they're still set on this standard that everyone needs to know English. We're in America, and for some reason, even though we have no official language, we kind of just assume that it's language, or English, sorry, and that everyone else needs to know it. And they were in Arizona, which is one of the few states where even though they had such a great programming, such a great way of teaching these kids and getting them to advance academically, but yet they're in one of the states that's trying to get rid of all of that. And so it's interesting that they chose Arizona.
They are an English-only state, right?
Yeah.
California.
California and Arizona, I think Massachusetts.
Oh, right.
Because we keep running into in those readings, it keeps putting that statistic out there that there's these certain states that have English only.
It just seems so weird because like there's such a high population of Latino people that they're English only. It's just
Yeah, well, that's why,
why.
probably.
I know,
They
like,
feel threatened by it.
it baffles me. I'm like, wait a minute, you're not doing what's best for your citizens. I won't get into all
It's
that,
kind of
but
interesting though, because you hear that coming out of Arizona, but New Mexico, you don't hear that, there isn't such a conservative backlash against it. But it makes me curious.
yeah,
Maybe it's because a lot of retired people move to Arizona or tend to be conservative. I don't know.
maybe.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the difference is between those,
Yeah.
or those two states in the same region anyway. Huh. Yeah, and it's the, that representative, or the public, or
The guy that was giving us
yeah, the
speech
public
everyone.
Arizona public education, just a very fascinating approach
Mhm.
to it.
And you saw like the students in the crowd, and they were like horrified at what he was saying. They're like, "Did he really just say that?" Like,
Well, and his whole argument was that they were segregating themselves, and his whole argument was that that the school was willingly segregating, perpetuating the segregation in Arizona, but he's neglecting the fact that these students, if they go to these other schools, that exactly that their culture and everything isn't represented. It's not, and so it's just a unique way to hold them down in a way, and I think that's the way these lawmakers use the government and school and every which way they can to exact their dominance over the minority population. And so if they can make English only law, that's a way of suppressing a great population of people.
Yeah, and maintaining their dominance. Like,
Yeah.
and it just seems like all their laws are just kind of aimed toward that, and like maintaining it with the next generation,
yeah.
Like, not-
And then we read about last week about how they talked about how lots of countries like they don't claim an official language, so that they don't have to like walk on eggshells around like who the dominant group is, but like you can already see that like it's present here. Like we don't need an official language to like
No.
try and tell us who the dominant group is and has been for like hundreds of years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking when you were saying that, how that kind of leads into the article about living in the shadows,
Yeah.
which is basically an article talking about the effect that, because there's a large population of the article used unauthorized, or other people say undocumented, and then there's just the effect that being in that status has on you.
Yeah, that's actually kind of what my jigsaw question was about. Is my question was about how would you explain these implications of being an unauthorized student or person to a teacher or peer, interested party, etc. And it's kind of like summarizing. And so I made a connection with when they mentioned Erickson in one of the articles
Yeah.
about how like when when you're in adolescence, there is like no other greater time in your life when you want to have that identity, have social acceptance and everything, and you're really trying to figure out who you are.
Right.
And thus having this label put on you of unauthorized and feeling like you can't celebrate and live your own culture, and then just like having all this conflict and like the potential that you and or your parents may be like forced to move and leave the country, and then there's the whole thing of not fitting into one or the other group. So it's just like all these conflicting things on their identity at such a time in their life when it's so important to them. So
Yeah, part of mine was to briefly describe different types of documentation status and describe interrupted rites of passage. So you have all these children that are growing up in American culture and American schools, and they have these expectations of these life milestone events, marriages, bar mitzvahs, or quinceañeras.
Even getting a driver's license.
Getting a driver's license, getting a job, getting married, like all this different stuff. And when they're younger, they're kind of sheltered and they're they're not as aware of the limitations of their legal status. As they get older, they become more and more aware as they run into these different, what they perceive as normal things in the process of growing up, and they're getting shut out. And so it's like they have these expectations and that are not being met, and they're kind of caught in this state of limbo where they don't really quite know where they belong. I can't, supposed to be learning how to drive like all my friends are, but my status is being hidden, and so I can't just walk into the DOL and
That's really
show
interesting.
my own identification again. You know, I don't know how that all works, but
Yeah, I
they're
agree.
missing out on being able to participate in normal cultural
Right.
activities.
Well, you're
Yeah.
living in this country but you're not really acknowledged or accepted. So, and you don't really, you know.
And a lot of them, when they're here so young, they speak the language. They're part of the
Right,
pop culture.
right,
They're part of their minority or white. I mean, they have all these different social circles that they're a part
Right.
of, and they're not allowed full access because of this
Yeah.
label. And it's not their fault. I mean, it's not necessarily. I wouldn't say it's blame your parents. You should be mad at your parents, but you know, it wasn't necessarily their choice to be born here to undocumented parents or be brought here from Mexico.
Well, it wasn't their choice.
As you know,
Yeah.
small tiny babies, and then
Right.
having to deal later in life with.
And that was one, yeah.
I was like,
That was one of the interesting lines I remember reading in it too. Is not necessarily labeling them illegal. It's like placing on them that they've done something wrong when it's
Mhm.
they've done nothing.
yeah, like
right.
unauthorized, you know, it just sounds
Yeah,
so
the-
hard.
Like there's something wrong with you. Yeah.
The mentality or the justification, I think, behind using the term unauthorized instead of unauthorized instead of undocumented
Mm-hmm.
or illegals is because a lot of them may have come here and through legal avenues initially, but like visas expired or this, that, and the other thing expired, and they're waiting in line to get naturalization or citizenship or whatever. But these lines are like 10 years long, and then once you
So
establish your
complicated.
own, you want to bring your family. Well, there's another 5-year wait to get
Right.
your
Yeah, it's
kids, you know,
Right.
status to be able to bring them over. And there's, 15 years go by, and finally your
Mhm.
kid that you had to leave with grandma back in Mexico is 15 years old and now finally able to come to the U.S. Well,
Yeah. And probably has more of a connection with the grandmother than with you.
Yeah,
And
and
that
there's that
causes
whole-
disruption in the family. Yeah.
It was really weird because there were these two women I worked with. One was named Monica, the other one was Johanna, and like they're both like separate. Johanna, like she grew up in LA, and like they were both talking about their stories of like when they were like waiting in line to like get citizenship, and like this time I think it was because like they were both born here, but like their parents, like they were waiting with their parents so that they could get citizenship, and they were saying like how like it's extremely depressing. Like you almost like feel like you're a criminal when you're getting interviewed, like as if there was something that you did wrong, and it was so weird hearing their stories, and I just like wanted to cry because I was like, I mean, cause like Monica, she's like not only can she speak English and Spanish perfectly, but she's also like she knows like sign language fluently, and so she can like 3 different languages. And I was telling her about how that makes
Yeah.
me.
I was just find it so interesting how, like, America is always saying, like kind of, like, being very proud of the fact that we come from all these different lands. We're like melting pot, or as I like to say, salad. I think
Salad bowl.
Yeah, salad
Yeah.
bowls is so much more friendly. 'Cause
Yeah.
we still get to be a vegetable. But anyway,
Stir fry.
It's delicate.
Yeah.
anyway, but like we're always being so proud of being a multicultural nation, and yet we make it so hard to become a citizen,
Mhm.
and then like we force these like dual identities that, as I had to read about, they hyphenated
Mhm.
identities on these people when it's just
But I think
interesting.
that's really a lot of what, what do I know? But it seems like a big thing that unauthorized people have to deal with is they do have to become bicultural, they have to know how to operate, in Latino culture, then they also have to know how to make white middle class people feel comfortable, you do have to know how to operate in more than one world.
That's a good point. Just
But more and more in these especially larger cities, it's crazy how these communities are built up,
Mhm.
and they basically simulate their homes.
Yeah,
You know, like in Detroit, there's a little Mexico,
right.
or
Chinatown.
It's basic, yeah. It's
To like go up to, I know it's not in America, but I was just up in Richmond in by New
Yeah,
Vancouver,
oh,
and it's like in all the restaurants they speak only in Chinese.
yeah, right.
Thankfully, I went with my Chinese
Yeah.
friend so she could
Yeah.
order us dinner. But
yeah.
it was just like, it's amazing how like even though they're in this like primarily English speaking part, like they have their culture so dominant in that area. And I thought it was just really cool. I was like, whoa, I'm the minority here. This is
Yeah.
very interesting.
The guy I work with is married to a Chinese woman. They go up to Richmond all the time because it is a way to make contact with Chinese culture. You know?
Yeah, it seems like a really nice escape for them, like
Yeah.
and be able like we went to a Buddhist temple and it felt like we were like in China. It was really cool actually. That was a cool side.
And I was just going to throw this in, but I used to work in the down at Skagit College in the evening program for immigrants and refugees, and there were a lot of students from Ukraine, but probably a majority were from Mexico, different parts of Mexico. And guy was just really, there were all these people that you didn't ask what your legal status was, you know, because
Oh no, that's very
yeah,
very
yeah,
Touchy
subject.
yeah, I mean, really. But this one guy, he told me, you know, after I was his teacher, and he was working he was at a bartender in a Mexican restaurant, and he wanted to go back to Mexico during the break, so he did. But there's these huge companies that smuggle people back and forth across the border, and some dramatic story like he was in the trunk of somebody's car, and it's just really. I mean,
Just to go visit. or
yeah, and then
break.
he came back. I don't know why he put himself at such risk for a short time. Yeah.
Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Should we start with the first turn?
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah.
I kind of like how we're doing it, just bouncing around a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's good because we basically were talking about the second article.
Yeah.
Should we just go into that one?
Let's jump in there.
I forget what my first section was.
Okay, hold on, I have it up. For instance, here.
So I guess I can.
Yeah, go
On
ahead.
A, I'll open.
Okay.
Different documentation status. There's the unauthorized and the mixed status. We talked about the unauthorized. The mixed status would be a family who one or more members are not authorized. So it could be a parent, it could be both parents, it could be one or more children. You could have older siblings that are unauthorized, younger siblings that live on U.S. soil. And then we talked about the interrupted rites of passage.
I thought that was really interesting. Like, I've never really even considered those rites of passage. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's rites of passages on both sides in both
Mhm.
cultures.
Right.
Like, you mentioned the quinceañera, and then of course there's like the American traditions, like, well, like getting driver's license or something like that. So I hadn't even really thought about that, like that they have this balance and everything. Like, I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend who had a quinceañera, and she invited me to it, and it was really cool. But I was like the only one of her white friends who showed up, and it was really interesting because I feel like
And she invited all these people and they didn't come.
yeah, I was the only one who showed up. It was so strange. Like,
That's weird.
yeah, like maybe they didn't know what a quinceañera was. I was really confused. I had a great time though.
They were very good.
Oh,
Oh,
food.
no. Panic
No,
holidays
that's
or
the first
celebrations are fun.
Yeah.
There was. I had a thought and I lost it. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Oh, there was one kind of personal story that they were talking about how this girl is the youngest of her siblings and she really likes creative writing and wants to go into creative art or creative writing for college. And she's the only authorized child of the family and her parents are trying to push her to go in the direction of health and being a doctor.
Mm.
And she says my older sister is a lot smarter and more has a lot more of those interests and abilities, better parents encourage that older sister to stay home and help with the family business and stuff because she's not documented, she can't go to college.
That is so sad.
Yeah.
Dang.
So great grades up through high school, graduated, awesome, has the capacity and potential to do well in upper level education, but just doesn't have access because of the
It's sort of the
status.
ultimate glass ceiling, or I don't know if it's even a glass ceiling, but I mean, like you can get up to this point, into high school, but no, you can't go to college, you can't, get a job, you can't really become an adult, which is one of the points that's made in one of those articles.
Yeah, you're like giving them all these hopes and expectations, and like, of course, high school teachers especially are always encouraging their students toward their futures and everything, and like
Right.
doing all these programs for writing a resume, writing a college application, and then, whoops, sorry, just kidding.
But I heard just like the other day, it sounds like the DREAM Act is going to pass in Washington State. So,
Yeah, the section I did was you probably read up on an article, but the Plyler v. Doe ruling, which was, they made it illegal to discriminate or to not provide education to someone based on their legal status. So, and that was pretty interesting, but as you're saying, so, they can get access to public education if they graduate, which those numbers are extremely low. If they graduate and do want to go to higher education, they realize a lot of times they can't because they don't have the social security number, they don't have the legal status, and then even jobs too.
Sure.
A lot of jobs cut down on that too, more than ever, as far as hiring undocumented workers, and so, yeah, talk about harsh reality waiting for them at the end of an already harsh adolescence.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Right.
They have all these hurdles to
Yeah.
jump through, and like we were talking about earlier, balancing their dual identities and everything, and then just when they think that they've overcome it all, then no.
Yeah, we make it pretty difficult, I think.
Right.
I can't imagine not having a social security number.
Yeah.
When you mentioned that,
Well, and then it also talked about how if they get one forged, and they get caught, then they'll get sent back,
Yeah.
Another unfortunate situation was a person from Korea who was brought here by his parents as a baby. His
Right.
father had a
Oh, yeah.
job
Right.
and a work visa. Well, economic downturn. This kid has already grown up in the education system, is enrolled in the UCLA. His father loses his job, which means he loses his visa. So the whole family has to go back. This person has an educational visa of some kind, but once he graduates high school or graduates college, he's going to have to go back to Korea.
And
He
he's
speaks Korean, but he doesn't read and write in Korean. He's
Right.
not a part of the Korean culture.
he's
That's not his
culturally
home.
American.
Yeah. So and I hear it happening a lot for Hispanic students too. If they're get deported or whatever, you're ripping this 16-year-old person, normal American kid, out of their home culture, even though their parents are from Mexico and they're Hispanic and they speak Spanish, and you're putting them in this place they've never visited, they have really no connection to. Where do you go from there?
There's a big backlash too in parts of Mexico. I've heard Korea too, for Americanized.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
ostracized from
Yeah,
there.
talk about stuck in the middle there.
Yeah, and in the article they were talking about how like one of the many stresses on ELL students is the fear of deportation.
Yeah.
Whether it's them or their parents, and then lots of times if you're an older sibling, that responsibility is now on you to take care of the younger ones, and it's so sad to read about. I'm sorry.
That was kind of going along with the question I answered for the second one that I was talking about earlier with the implications of how that can just so mess with one's mentality and attitude and of course
Motivational factors.
yeah,
absolutely.
motivational, and then of course all those things in your mind impact how you behave socially and physically. like and who you like how you find ways to belong. It's just like I just feel like it's just like one big domino effect of this.
Mhm.
Anybody else like to share on their piece of
Um,
the puzzle?
in the first article, it talks about I forget the name of the
Academic
article.
engagement.
Yeah, about engaging academically and different factors involved with what causes a student to become engaged or not. And they talk about what engagement meant, and engagement could mean just physically you're going to school and doing the homework, or it could mean also that I think they call it cognitive engagement, where you're actually thinking and participating
yeah.
actively in discussions.
Active learning.
Yeah, and there was one more that had to do with relational engagement, where you had meaningful relationships with other people. And the different readings that we've done since this class started, I just keep coming back to that point of that seems really important for a student to connect with, somebody,
Yeah.
with their peers, but also with an older person. That wouldn't have
Yeah.
to necessarily be the teacher. But also that movie, Precious Knowledge, made me, again, kind of reinforce the point in my mind that it's important that it be a person of your same, that comes from where you come from. Like, it's important to have somebody in your life like that you can really connect with, who's like you,
Yeah, I feel like that's why that class was just so important to those kids, because it was a place where they actually like felt like they belonged, Like that's why I think this is so devastating for when it was getting shut down and why they're fighting so hard for it. It's like these kids are fighting for a place where they belong, and like that's what like America's always done. We've always fought for our place, and like they're doing the same thing and getting shut down. But
When you, like that school, when you see, and again, this is coming from an outside Caucasian perspective.
Right.
yeah,
I've
We all are.
never been Mexican before, so I can't necessarily speak to that. But when you see someone of your own race and culture being successful,
Mhm.
it's far different than seeing someone else. A white female male teacher. That can still be an example, but I don't think it resonates in the same way.
Yeah.
And that's a big effort even in Detroit of trying to get African American teachers into the school and just successful people in general returning to their communities, because the idea is those who are successful
Actively.
Yeah.
and they never come back
they
to the
want
hood.
to get out.
The dream is to
And
escape.
so,
There's nothing there
a
for 'em
successful
except for-
person, again, whatever that means, and educated person, and even education in general is such an abstract concept because they have no one to tell them about it. They can have, a white male come in and say, hey, you this is what you kids need to do, blah, 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 but it's just another talking head.
Yeah, right.
and-
And to some extent, why put forth the effort of getting through high school when you know that you have no opportunities to go to college? There's really not a whole lot of jobs around here, so you might as well peddle some drugs and make some money.
And make good money.
And make good money rather than sitting in the classroom and not get any benefit out of that moment of being in the classroom, but also thinking this moment is supposed to be setting me up for this future that isn't there, so what's the point?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that someone from a different culture can't have a great effect, but I think a way of compensating for that is making an effort to validate their culture and to bring in material that represents their culture and their way of knowledge and their values and at least trying to make an effort to teach somewhat like that school is doing. I mean, obviously you're not going to create that school as a whole, but you can adopt elements of that into your own teaching.
But also finding ways to get them to connect with their community.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're living in a dilapidated
people
building
in.
with a
Yeah.
nasty, dirty
Mhm.
park.
Right.
Let's brainstorm ways to create a project to have the community come help.
Sounds
that's
like
hard.
community assets mapping.
Yeah.
What resources do we have?
In the second article, they're talking about civic engagement and how you don't really see a lot from parents because like some of them are unauthorized, and to be in that political light, that makes you more like that's putting a spotlight on you, which
Yeah.
is kind of risky. But then I was saying how like the kids though, like they can have a better influence in civic engagement because like not only are they like most of them, at least for some of them, I guess, are authorized, but also like a lot of them were talking about how like if you're like Latino, like you might have like a big dominance in like religion, and like that can like influence you to be involved in civic engagement with like your like church community, and then like slowly but surely kind of build off of that.
Yeah, that's one thing. It was talking about these different ways that you can be engaged civically, and some of them they're not able to vote, obviously, if you're
Yeah.
unauthorized. But it
there's
did
other
say,
ways.
yeah, there are other ways you can march or write letters or
Mhm.
or come out.
Yeah.
That is so interesting that that phrase is used for unauthorized
Mhm.
youth.
Yeah, because in the first article, like I had to read about like social mirroring and about like how these students feel that like how Americans see them, and it was everything from like they see me as like an animal to like they see me as like a gang member, and I'm like and then it was saying like there's two ways like they will respond to this. Either like like they'll be like, fine, I will show you. Like, you think I'm bad, like, just wait now. But then,
Right.
like, they're the other kids who will, like, take that. And they'll be like, fine, let me prove to you that
Right.
you're wrong.
Challenge accepted.
Exactly. So it's, like, it really, like, depends on, like, how those, like, students interpret all of these, like, reflections they're seeing from, like, society.
But I think that's a really important point, that the other people's opinion is a lot more, plays a larger role in their life than it should. Why should, that's how it is for them, they have no choice, but, for us, we don't have to deal with that. I mean, these other people are telling you all these things, these images are being presented to you, and you have to somehow deal with that and fight through that to feel good about yourself.
Well,
There's
there's
also
also-
with us, like people think like okay, we're mainly Caucasian people here, and people might think that like because of that, like we stand with like a huge history of generations before us, and
Right.
that like we're gonna treat you a certain way, but
Right.
like we're that exception, like we're like the people who are trying to show like, yes, we do accept you, we welcome you, no matter what you think, like we welcome you even if like not the rest of the country.
And then there's like the whole issue of like what do people of their own culture think of them?
Right.
Like that was kind of going back to my what I was talking about with the hyphenated self, about how like someone could be Latino American. Okay, am I gonna act more American and get scorned from the Latino community, or vice versa? It's like finding that balance and everything. I just thought that was an interesting point.
It is so tough. And that's why they kept using that word liminal. I get the
was-
Joy
yeah.
said something about there's some words you're gonna have to look up, but like, get out your dictionary or something. But yeah, they kept using that word liminal, and I think that's what that means, is like caught in between cultures.
Yeah.
Where you don't really belong there, but you don't really belong here, and trying to negotiate that.
Or being
Yeah.
transcultural, where
Mhm,
like
yeah.
you kind of like
That's
have
what
a
you
good,
have to
like,
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
have a good sense of yourself, and then you can like acquire another culture.
But,
I just remember hearing. I took the American Cultural Studies Latino class a couple quarters ago, and I just found one thing that I related back to this so interesting was how, like, even within groups where there's like, just to use an example, like Latino Americans and immigrants from Hispanic countries, even they treat each other differently. I just thought that was such an interesting point. Like,
Sure.
yeah, like there's even like those groups within that group.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. I was just like,
When I worked at Skagit Valley College, there were a lot of people who were from Oaxaca, or they spoke indigenous languages. They didn't they spoke Spanish, but they also spoke their indigenous language. So yeah, I mean, it's really a false thing to talk about Hispanics or Native Americans, because those groups are, there's all kinds of different.
oh yeah, there's groups
Populations
within
within that.
groups. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Right.
Like or in another class we were talking about with Native American cultures, how there's like nations within nations. That's why that was
Right.
just a point I connected. But
Was there one last point or two we'd like to touch upon? We're already
Yes,
Oh, did
5.
we-
30 minutes.
So we're into 30 minutes now? There was one thing that was in one of those articles, I forget which one, but it was about parents connecting with the schools.
Mm.
And that the American schools is considered important for the parents to be actively engaged with the school, but for, I don't know, I guess in Mexican culture, the parents show respect to the school by not interfering with what they're doing
Yeah,
or
that
something.
is true.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was really
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. And then the kid winds up suffering because the
Well, I
school thinks the parents don't
think that's
care.
important for the educators to, again, understand the culture
Right.
background of their students. Yeah, you come from Mexico, yes, you may or may not be documented, but what are like cultural norms that, why isn't your parents coming to meet? Is it because they have language issues? Is it because they culturally, it's just a cultural thing that they kind of give authority to
Right,
the teachers because they're the experts and they know best,
Right.
kind of a thing?
Because like every culture has a different view of education.
And it's, yeah, and I mentioned in there too, how difficult, just as it is for us to interpret maybe their stance on education, it's the same for them. And trying to navigate through the public school system and what's acceptable and what's not, and then you add in the language barrier, and that's intimidating in and of itself.
Sure.
And
Right.
it's and then adding in working and possibly being unauthorized or illegal.
Yeah, and schools are
yeah, it's
authority sort of institutions.
it's almost just like trying to be out of sight, out of mind to save themselves in a way.
Right.
But yeah, all those factors added up, and it's like, yeah, no wonder they're not
Yeah,
at the
that's
PTA.
kind of what the article seemed to be saying, that there's almost all negative, the factors that were influencing these kids or impacting them in all these different areas.
Yes.
And we spoke, Tabby and I spoke to the ELL instructor at Squalicum last week.
Yeah.
And she mentioned that was one of their main goals was to increase the parental involvement, or at least communication with them. And she said one of the main issues was their work schedule. There's a lot of them work in the evening.
Right.
So that's a big obstacle for them. It's pretty interesting. And it's hard work too. It's physically
Right.
tiring.
Oh my
work.
gosh, well think about
Well, yeah.
yourself, just coming to a new country, new language, trying to survive yourself. And that's a whole lot of work already. And now
Yeah.
you have 3 children while you're already going through this process. You have 3 children that are going through this process and you're trying to keep them supported financially, emotionally, whatever, while yourself is adjusting to all these different things. It's
So
hard. Yeah.
Overwhelming.
Oh yeah, big
and
time.
Johnson, she was talking about how we understand that we have a lot of Spanish speakers here, so more people are learning Spanish, but we also have so many other languages that are
Sure.
coming in.
Oh, big time.
We don't have an official district person who can help this kid one-on-one all the time and help translate with them all the time, because there's not as many people who can speak that variety of languages, and
Right.
it's just what do? You don't have enough people, you don't have enough money for funding all of these resources.
Right. I'm curious though, what at Squalicum, where you guys went, what languages are they saying?
She's talking about Demise, or did I say that right? What was their language that she said?
To me, sounds like a dead language.
Burmese?
It's mainly Spanish speaking, and then she said there's a couple of Russian,
Ukrainian, yeah. those are
Ukrainian
huge.
students,
Yeah.
and then
Total 12.
and then the Vietnamese, but mainly Spanish speaking, and so with their issue too is within that program.
Right.
Some of those other non-English or non-Spanish speaking students feel a little slighted too,
Yeah.
because they don't get the same services as those Spanish speaking
Right.
students do.
Right.
Or at least that same level of
Sure.
attention.
As an ELL teacher, she was saying you don't need to speak another language either. And so she spoke Spanish, but their ELL coordinator, he doesn't speak any language other than English. And so it's just like there's so many barriers that are like standing in the way to like being able to connect with these students because like I mean not only are like they like both like white people too, but it's
Mhm.
like they can't really relate with them on that. But
Right.
if like you can't even like I don't know like talk to them in their like own language, I think that's another way that you can like kind of like form a bond with them.
Yeah, it's all
You're
going.
making an effort too. I mean, you've got a Chinese student and a Russian student, and a couple of Hispanic students, a bunch of white kids. Have those dictionaries on hand. So when they're giving you that look like, I really don't know what you're saying, and even if you don't know how to pronounce the word, if they're literate in their own language, you can at least kind of point and they'll kind of pick up on, and there's all kinds of different strategies and ways to
Yeah,
be able to break down the barriers. It takes time and effort, but
Yeah, and just showing that you care and want to take the time to help them. Like just having that dictionary in hand, making that effort, you know? I think that even that's just important in itself.
anything
Alright.
else?
Cool, well, good.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah,
Bye.
it's like we belong to a
Familiar
little social
faces.
club or something.
I know. I like
It's
that.
like a weekly book club.
Yeah,
It's like
I know.
book club.
No, I like it.
Me too.
I think it's much better to do it this way than,
The post.
yeah,